The G20 Leaders Summit will discuss strategic issues and the role of the G20 as part of the solution to a wide range of global challenges, including, amongst others, addressing food and energy insecurity, strengthening the global health architecture, and advancing digital transformation. The President will address 2 working sessions. The first session will focus on the food and energy security. In his input, President Ramaphosa will call for substantial financial support for countries with developing economies that are most affected by food shortages and effects of climate change. In this regard, South Africa will support that addressing food insecurity challenges must be a top G20 priority. On energy, South Africa's strategic objectives at the G20 will be to advance practical cooperation in terms of the G20 voluntary collaboration on energy access with a continuous focus on sub-Saharan Africa, to ensure that the discussion on clean energy takes into account all forms of clean energy, such as clean coal technology and nuclear, to ensure affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. This is important in the context of the existing South Africa energy mix policy. Lastly, to guard against onerous commitments placed on developing countries regarding phasing out fossil fuels, which may negatively affect the poor. During the second working session, which will focus on health, President Ramaphosa will emphasize the urgent need to strengthen the global health architecture that will respond quickly and effectively to the next pandemic. The President will call for a permanent global coordination and governance mechanism that will enable collaboration, priority setting, pooling of resources, technology transfer, and the research and development of medical countermeasures. Both the above-mentioned working sessions will take place on Tuesday, the 15th of November. For planning purposes, colleagues, you are encouraged to look out for the advisories that we will issue on the exact times the President will address the 2 plenary sessions. As customary, during these summits, President Ramaphosa will also hold several bilateral meetings, amongst which will include China and other key trade partners. We'll also confirm the bilateral program through the advisories that we will issue during the course of the summit. On the 18th of November, President Ramaphosa will deliver an address to the National Council of Provinces session, Taking Parliament to the People, which will be held in Port Shepstone in the Ugu district of the province of KwaZulu-Natal. The President's speech will focus on building agile state capabilities to improve service delivery outcomes. The President will speak to broader systemic reforms currently underway. A key element of this endeavor is the national framework towards the implementation of professionalization of the public sector, which was adopted by Cabinet on the 19th of October this year. The framework makes specific proposals to stabilize the political administrative interface, ensure merit-based recruitment and selection, and more effective consequence management. In this regard, all public sector legislation governing professionalization will be reviewed and, where necessary, amended to align to this framework. Just to touch briefly on the Just Energy Transition and the funding of the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, following some of the debates that have been taking place in the country post the President's attendance of COP27. South Africa needs to contribute to the reduction of global carbon emissions if we are to limit global warming and prevent the worsening effects of climate change. South Africa's exports need to remain competitive in a global economy where goods from countries with high carbon emissions will soon attract high tariffs. Unless we reduce our emissions, many of the goods that we seek to export will find key markets close to them. Thus, South Africa's economy will struggle to grow and create jobs. We need to access finance for infrastructure development and industrialization when more and more banks are not investing in high-emission industries. Our companies will struggle to get financing for infrastructure, factories, and other projects. Therefore, a just transition is needed to ensure that a shift to a low-carbon economy does not negatively affect workers, communities, and broader society. For example, new jobs and opportunities need to be created for workers in the old power stations that are being decommissioned and those in the coal mines that supply them. They need to be skilled and reskilled to take up positions in new industries. Affected communities will benefit from the building of new renewable energy plants and new industries that produce materials for renewable energy, such as electric vehicles, green hydrogen, and mining for minerals needed in the new economy. Community members should be able to participate directly in these industries and indirectly through the businesses that will support the new economic activity. Government has produced a just energy transition investment plan that calculates that South Africa will need around 1.5 trillion rands over the next 5 years to meet these goals. The money will need to come from various sources, including the funding that industrialized countries have promised to developing countries, as well as from commercial financial institutions. At the UN Climate Change Summit last year, France, Germany, the UK, the US, and the European Union pledged around 140 billion rands to support our just transition. An initial amount of 10.7 billion rands has been received in low-interest loans from Germany and France. While South Africa welcomes low-interest or concessional loans, a substantial portion of this funding needs to be in the form of grants. I'll end there for now, colleagues, and then open the floor to questions. Is there a hand? Over there, yes. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Magwenya. Thank you so much. Abongile Dumago, SABC News. With regards to the just transition with the loan that has been granted, and of course the low interest that you're speaking about, what are the terms and conditions? Are we even going to be able to afford such in as far as paying back? And when are we supposed to pay back that money that we're being given? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. I think I saw a hand in front here. Johan, did you have your hand up?
My question is about a report today in City Press that talks about serious concerns with the stability in the cabinet. I know this is a different topic, but is it true? Is there instability in the cabinet, and how does it affect the work of the parliament?
Sorry, instability or stability?
Instability.
Instability. In cabinet?
Sorry. In the cabinet, yes.
Right, okay.
Thank you.
And Johan, can you just clarify, does this report, because I haven't seen it, does it specify with which members of cabinet, or
no, they just say,
it's a very broader general sort of...
They say President Ramaphosa is, there's an onslaught because of the instability. I just want to know, how does it affect the work of Parliament, these allegations?
The work of the presidency?
Presidency, sorry.
Okay, all right, thanks. The next question?
The United States Department of Treasury sanctioned alleged members of ISIS in the country who allegedly provided financial and technical support to this terrorist group. Can we have the latest development in that matter? The government said it is working with other law enforcement agencies. Are there possible arrests?
Okay. Let me start with Abongile. Abongile, as I've said, and as it has been communicated a number of times by the President, the just transition process is going to take place over a period of time. South Africa is looking at multiple sources of funding. The preferred structure, as the President has articulated, is one that is more upweighted to what we will call your non-debt instruments or grants in simple language. And then you will have an element of concessional loans. Now, with respect to the terms and conditions will be your sort of normal applicable terms and conditions in this regard. National Treasury can provide you with more details, but it won't be anything out of the norm, number one. Number two, with respect to affordability, yes, the country can afford to service these debts, but having said that, there's a lot of work that's being done currently to ensure that we get the right balance between debt portions of this funding versus your non-debt instruments, so to speak. That work is currently underway. The broader principle is that we simply cannot afford not to invest into the country's medium-term and long-term energy security future. That we cannot afford. We don't have that luxury to say, can we invest or not? We have to, in order to sustain and stimulate our economy, but in order to bequeath to future generations a country that will be energy secure, a country that will have an economy that is inclusive and that delivers to everybody's needs. So it is an immediate task of this administration to ensure that in the medium to long term, South Africa does enjoy energy security, and those investments have to be made now, and those investments have to be drawn, or the funding of those investments has to be drawn from multiple sources of funding, utilizing multiple instruments that are available, obviously with a focus that on the debt side of things, that debt is affordable and it does not increase the burden that the country is already feeling in this regard, or already has in this regard. Johan, instability in cabinet, the President is not aware of such. We are not aware of any instability in cabinet. I've had the privilege to, as support staff to the President, to attend a number of cabinet meetings. There's been no sense of instability. There is a level of cooperation between the President and his cabinet members. So I'm not quite sure where that report references that impression from, but in terms of facts, there is the necessary cordial, working, professional relationship between the President and the rest of his cabinet, as well as all other cabinet members in terms of their collaboration and cooperation and working together on the normal course of business. One will have to interrogate that report. One will also need to get specifics. It can't just be a generic reference to say there's instability in cabinet. Cabinet meets regularly as per the determined calendar. All elements of cabinet work that have to go through cabinet do go through. We've not experienced a case where there's been gridlock in cabinet because of the so-called instability. So I can say categorically there's no such. Neither is the president aware of the so-called instability. On sanctioned, just please repeat that question again for me. So I'm not at liberty to give you the latest as you phrased your question, except to provide the following assurance, that it remains the responsibility of the South African security forces to ensure that all people within our country are safe. Law enforcement agencies always monitor for any threats to our citizens, our nation, and sovereignty. The South African and the United States law enforcement agencies will continue in the normal course of their work to exchange critical information whenever necessary within the context of the bilateral relationship between the two countries and ongoing cooperation on security-related matters. Furthermore, on the announcements, on that particular announcement, on those individuals, there was nothing necessarily new from a South African law enforcement agency point of view. So there was no new information that our law enforcement agencies did not have. That must be made clear. They are on top of that situation. Okay. Takanda, do we have questions from WhatsApp so that we don't forget them?
We have a few. The first is from Kulego Siwela from Bloomberg. He's asking whether there will be discussions on the African Union becoming a member of the G20. Will this be agreed to at the upcoming G20 summit? And will there be South Africans involved in any discussions on the common framework for this inclusion? And what, if any, is expected to come out of those discussions? He's also asking whether, or rather, who along the president will be representing South Africa at the G20. And then we also have a question from Ellington, John Ellington of the New York Times. He's asking whether the president revealed to the NEC how much money was stolen from his Palapala farm and where the money came from. The last question I have is from Jason Felix from News 24. He's also asking a question related to Palapala. He's asking whether the president has considered the impact of the ANC pushing for him to step aside over the Palapala allegations against him. This weekend there has been renewed pressure for some within the ruling party for the president to step aside. Those are the three questions thus far.
Okay, so we'll take that round and then we'll come back to this room for what may be the final round of questions. Okay, so with respect to the AU's admission into the G20, South Africa's position is going to be that South Africa supports the AU's admission into the G20. We think it's important that the collective voice of the continent is represented within that platform of your G20 economies, and South Africa will be involved in formulating that framework or participation framework of the AU. It is our sincere hope that that proposal will find favor and be endorsed by the member countries of the G20. With respect to NEC-related questions, the weather is quite bad today, so I don't have my parachute. So I'm not going to parachute myself into ANC, NEC matters. I'm not the member of the NEC. I'm not mandated to speak on those issues. So those questions are best directed to the relevant party in that regard. More broadly, on the matter relating to Phala, it is public knowledge that the President has committed his full cooperation with all the ongoing investigations. The President has submitted on deadline and on time his submission to the Section 89 inquiry panel. We will allow that panel to conclude its work and submit its report to Parliament before we consider any public release of the President's submission. At this stage, we want to respect that process. Beyond that, there's not much I can really say because I was not present at those NEC discussions. As I've said, I'm not a member of the NEC, neither am I mandated to speak on discussions that are taking place within that structure. Should we take a round in this room now of questions? Yes, sir.
Find out on the working relationship of Minister Sisulu and the President. How is it? And also, do you maybe want to comment on what she said about you, saying that you are parachuting yourself into internal ANC politics? And also, we saw that Ms. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma said that maybe it would be best for the President to step aside for the allegations of Phala. Do you know maybe if today the President or the NEC maybe has decided that he might step aside because we see that he's going to be speaking at 4? Do you know maybe any decisions to say has he stepped aside? And and also the gag order. Is there anything like that, the gag order that the President can't speak about, couldn't speak to the Integrity Commission of the ANC because of the gag order that the Public Protector said he can't speak about those issues in public?
So, okay, let's take another question.
Hi, Nangululeko from Daily Maverick. On the just transition process, are you able to just give an indication percentage-wise of where we are, of how much has been pledged so far in terms of the loans and the grants?
Okay. We'll take another question. We don't have any more questions. Sagana, are there more questions from WhatsApp? Not yet. Okay. Relationship between Minister Sisulu and the President, there's no problem there. It's a cordial, professional working relationship. Minister Sisulu serves in cabinet at the prerogative of the President. And in that regard, there's no issue. Do I have a comment on what was said about me? No, I don't. The message that I delivered still remains as it was delivered. With regards to calls for the President to step aside, the President has not been charged of any crime. There are investigations that are taking place. In this regard, the presumption, the constitutionally enshrined presumption of innocence until proven guilty remains. And so I guess the question is best posed to those who've made the call for the President to step aside as to what informs those calls. Should the president be charged, he will gladly step aside, if should it be the case. But as things stand, there are no criminal charges against the president. What you have is a series of investigations that he's fully cooperating with, and he will continue to do so until those investigations are concluded. On the structure of the loans, that's work in progress at the moment. That's work in progress at the moment to, as I've said, to upweigh the grant portion or the non-debt instruments of that funding, but also then to look at the sort of low interest element of that funding. At this stage, I'm not able to give you the exact split, except to say there is a split on the table, which the president has not found satisfactory. As a result, there's more work that's being done in that regard. Okay, colleagues, I think that concludes our session in the absence of any more questions on WhatsApp. So kind of just double check so that we don't get into trouble for having ignored questions.
I'm just seeing one more question here that just came in. It's from Velani Luditi of the Daily Maverick. He says there's a woman by the name of Patricia Mashale who is a whistleblower and says she has a dossier on Minister Cele. She is accusing the president of protecting Minister Cele. Is the presidency aware of this woman, and has she been engaged?
Dossier on Minister Cele, no. We are not aware of such information. Yes, we're not aware of such information. As far as I know, nobody in the presidency has had any engagement with the person in question. So, yeah, it's a difficult one to respond to in detail, but we're not aware of such a dossier, and we're not in receipt of such information. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much. That concludes our session. Thank you. Baba, sondela. Indaba ungifune khoneni amakhamera sengishele. Konje kamba. Oh, okay, so.
So do you hear months ago?
Oh, 20 months ago.
Problem started with this.